Hello there, I'm Bill Sears. The promised one has come. I thought perhaps that Marguerite and I could tell all of you the thrilling and dramatic story about the fulfillment of prophecy from the sacred scriptures of the past, which took place when Baha'u'llah came into the world. Let me give you a sample of the excitement we're about to share together. Prophecy.
Ezekiel, chapter 43, verse 4. And the glory of the Lord came into the house by way of the gate, whose prospect is toward the east.
Baha'u'llah's name in English means the glory of the Lord, or the glory of God. And he did come to Israel from the east. Baha'u'llah's birthplace in Tehran, Persia, is directly east of Israel. And he did come by way of the gate. Baha'u'llah, like Christ before him, had a herald, a forerunner. Christ had John the Baptist. Baha'u'llah had a young man, a wonderful young man called the Bab. He was a prophet in his own right. He prepared the way for Baha'u'llah, just as it was foretold would happen in the scriptures. The Bab's name, spelled B-A-B, when translated into English means the gate. Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, came to the Holy Land from the east by way of the Bab, the gate. But that's only the beginning. Still Ezekiel. Prophecy.
Chapter 43, verse 2. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east, and his voice was like a noise of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory.
Baha'u'llah, whose name means the glory of God, came from the east. He wrote over 100 volumes. His name is known now in more than 316 countries, territories, and islands, and in over 50,000 places in the world his faith is established. All this has taken place in just a little over 100 years. Imagine how the earth has shined with Baha'u'llah's glory. That's what Baha means, glory. Prophecy.
Jeremiah, chapter 49, verse 38. And I will set my throne in Elam, and will destroy from thence the king and the princes, saith the Lord.
Jeremiah says this will take place in the latter days. And where does Jeremiah say God will set his throne? In Elam. Elam was once part of the land which we know as Persia, Iran, the birthplace of both Baha'u'llah and his herald, the Bab. Baha'u'llah wrote many letters and messages to the kings of the world at that time, too. He warned them that they would lose their kingdoms and their power if they did not do the work of God and protect their people. Well, they did not, and their kingdoms were destroyed.
You can read that story or hear about it in a book called The Promised Day Is Come. The kings were punished because of their own heedless actions, just as Baha'u'llah said they would be.
There are other books written about this dramatic story of Baha'u'llah's letters to the kings, too. You can read them yourself or have someone read these marvelous stories to you. Kingdom after kingdom falls, exactly as foretold by Baha'u'llah and by the prophets of old. It happened as Jeremiah said it would happen, in the day when God would set his throne in Elam, Persia, and would destroy the wicked rulers. Now, let's examine a few prophecies from some of the lesser-known books. Prophecy.
And then from the sunrise, God shall send a king who shall give every man release from the bane of war. Nor shall he do these things by his own counsel, but in obedience to the good ordinances of the mighty God.
That prophecy is from the ancient Jewish writings. The Jewish author Joseph Klausner, in his book The Messianic Idea in Israel, says that this king from the sunrise is without any doubt the King Messiah. Those are his words. Baha'u'llah came to Israel from the sunrise, from the east. The world center of the Baha'i faith is established in Israel. The kingdom of Baha'u'llah is now spreading into all parts of the world. Prophecy.
If there is but 1 minute remaining in the whole world, I will send someone from this nation, Persia, who will renew religion.
And that's from one of the traditional sacred prophecies of Zoroaster, the messenger of God for the Zoroastrian people. It's from the book of Nateg, called Religious Debates. Here's another.
When Persia and the other countries are overtaken by the Arabs, I will choose one from the generation of the kings of Persia, so that he will call the people of the world from east to west to worship one God.
The guardian of the Baha'i faith, Shoghi Effendi, tells us in God Passes By, one of his books, that Baha'u'llah was descended from the line of the Sasanian dynasty of the kings of Persia. Baha'u'llah was also descended from Zoroaster, he says. In the writings of more than one faith, Persia has been given a special place for the last days. Although the Bible scholars couldn't say why. They would say, Persia has a special place, but why, we do not know. That's almost a quotation from one of them. Let's go back to the Bible, to the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel led many people to discover the prophecies about the first coming of Christ. These prophecies also speak of Christ's return in the glory of the Father, Baha'u'llah. You can read some answered questions by Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, and other books too. These books will tell you the story in detail. Here, we will touch only upon a few highlights. For example, here is another prophecy about Persia. This is from Daniel. Prophecy.
Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. And at that time there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered.
Daniel, in these same chapters, tells us about the coming of this great messenger of God. And where did Daniel make all of these wonderful prophecies? Where was he when he said these things? Daniel made these prophecies in Elam, in Persia. Daniel said that Persia, Elam, would be given as a place of vision in the latter days. Daniel wrote in Shushan, in ancient Persia. Shushan was the capital city of Elam, of that ancient land we know now as Persia or Iran. Another prophecy. Baha'u'llah's mission on earth lasted 40 years. It began in the Black Pit prison in Tehran, Persia. It ended with Baha'u'llah's passing in the Holy Land, Israel, some 40 years later. Joseph Klausner, in his book, The Messianic Idea in Israel, remember I mentioned the book earlier? Klausner quotes R. Eliezer Ben Hyrcanus, another respected Jewish author, as saying this:
The days of the Messiah will last 40 years.
Baha'u'llah's mission on earth lasted exactly 40 years. Sir Edward Irving, a Christian clergyman and Bible scholar, spent much time studying the prophecies about when Christ would return. He expected Christ to return in the 1843-45 period. Edward Irving also wrote about a prophecy that he discovered in India when he was there, about a religion that would come from the West and would possess the world in 40 years.
And Persia, of course, is west of India.
These prophecies are only a few of the least of the prophecies. Wherever we look, in whatever direction we turn, we will see proof after proof announcing the coming of Baha'u'llah. Since most of us in the West were Christians before we became Baha'is, let's talk a little bit about Christ. What did Christ himself say about Baha'u'llah? What did Jesus say about his own return? Now, let's get back to our prophecies and see what Christ himself told us about his return. For that's what Baha'u'llah is, make no mistake about that. Baha'u'llah is the return of Christ. Let's talk about specific prophecies. Christ made 3 distinct promises to his disciples, promises that were meant for the whole world. Jesus told his followers exactly when he would return. There was no doubt about it. Let's see what those 3 promises were. Chapter 24, verse 3 of Matthew. These are the words of the Bible now. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world? Well, that's plain enough, isn't it? When will Christ return? What did he say himself? Prophecy.
Matthew 24th chapter, verse 14. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come.
When the gospel of Christ is preached in all the nations of the world for a witness, the end will come and Christ will return. That's Christ's own prophecy. This is what he told his disciples, and through them his followers, us, in the years to come. This is what Christ told us. This is what we should look for when the gospel is preached in all the nations. Then he, Christ, would return to earth.
In the years of the 1840s, Christian Bible scholars became very interested in this prophecy. They were convinced that by the 1840s, the gospel of Christ had already spread around the world, so Christ should return any minute.
By 1844, the gospel was being taught even in the interior of Africa. In the book Thief in the Night, which I wrote some time ago, I devoted several pages to the fulfillment of this prophecy. I'll only mention one here. It is from a Christian Bible scholar, not a Baha'i. In his book, Our Day in the Light of Prophecy, written concerning the period of the 1840s, Spicer, the author, S-P-I-C-E-R, wrote that the gospel of Christ in his day had been spread to most of the inhabitants of the earth. A similar prophecy about the time of the return of Christ is given also in the book of Mark, chapter 13, verse 10, which informs us that,
"And the gospel must first be published among all the nations, and then Christ will return."
this prophecy of Christ had indeed already been fulfilled by the time of the 1840s. By the year 1844, the year of the birth of the Baha'i faith, the gospel of Christ had been published widespread among the nations and had reached into every part, almost every part of the world. So we see that the first promise of Christ was fulfilled by the year 1844, the year of the birth of the Baha'i faith, the faith of Baha'u'llah. In that same chapter, Mark 13, verse 33, Christ warns his followers to be awake and to watch for that day. He said,
"Take ye heed, watch and pray, for ye know not when the time is."
Now, after more than a century, many of the Christians are still waiting, although the Baha'i faith came over 100 years ago and fulfilled so exactly this first promise of Christ. Now we come to the second promise of Christ. This second promise of Christ is from the book of Luke. Once again, the disciples asked Christ when he would return. And these are the words of the Bible now, chapter 21, verse 7. "Master, but when shall these things be? And what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass?" Christ warns them not to be deceived, but to read the signs in the right way and to understand his words. Prophecy.
Luke chapter 21, verse 24. "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled."
Some time after the crucifixion of Christ, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Roman Titus. Later, the city was totally destroyed. It was plowed under and renamed. The Jews were banished. Many of them suffered exactly as Christ had foretold. They fell by the edge of the sword, they fled, they were scattered, and they were led away captive. When was the time of the Gentiles fulfilled? Let us see. After the Romans, the Muslims conquered Jerusalem. The holy city was made forbidden territory for the Jews. Until what time, do you think? Until the year 1844, the year of the beginning of the Baha'i faith.
In 1844, a document called the Edict of Toleration was signed. This Edict of Toleration is also mentioned by Worth Smith in his book Miracle of the Ages. He points out, in the year A.D. 1844, the Muslims, under the leadership of Turkey, were compelled by the Western powers, notably England, to grant religious toleration to all nations within their borders.
Imagine that.
This document, called the Edict of Toleration, was signed March 21st, 1844. It permitted the Jews to return to their homeland for the first time in some 12 centuries. You can read about it in history.
Of course, I'm giving you only a few of these marvelous prophecies. Now, let's get on with that second promise of Christ, which concerns the time of the Gentiles. This time, it's from the book of Revelation, a book that speaks constantly about the return of Christ. Christ's return, in fact, is a major theme of the whole book. Revelation also speaks about the times of the Gentiles and tells us when the times of the Gentiles would be fulfilled. Listen, Prophecy.
Revelation chapter 11, verse 2. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not. For it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months.
42 months is 3.5 years, or 1260 days. In those days, you know, they used the lunar calendar, and a year was 360 days, not 365. So 42 months makes 1260 days. The Christian Bible scholars who were studying about the return of Christ in those days agreed that in Bible prophecy a day is taken to mean a year. Thus, these Bible scholars took 1260 days to be 1260 years. At the end of that time, at the end of 1260 years, the times of the Gentiles would be fulfilled. So says the book of Revelation. These are Christian Bible scholars, mind you, not Baha'is. You will find their reasons for using a day as a year in prophecy in the Bible. You can find it in the book of Numbers, 14th chapter, verse 34, and again in Ezekiel, 4th chapter, 6th verse, and so on. We won't go into the details here. You can study that for yourself. And do you know what? The year 1260 of the Muslim calendar is identical with the year 1844 of the Christian calendar. Think of that. In that same chapter of Numbers mentioned above, verse 21, the Lord says,
But as truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord.
And that, of course, we know is the meaning of Baha'u'llah's name when translated into English, the glory of the Lord, or the glory of God. And so thus the times of the Gentiles was ended, and the second promise of Christ was fulfilled with the exactness of the stars in 1844. So already we see that two of the promises which Christ himself gave to his disciples were fulfilled in a beautiful and marvelous way by the year 1844.
That brings us to the third promise of Christ.
Yes. What about the third promise of Christ? We find this promise in the book of Matthew. When Christ's disciples asked him, What shall be the sign of thy coming? Jesus told them this, and this is Christ's third clear promise. Prophecy.
Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand.
Daniel, in chapters 8 through 12, deals with both the first and the second coming of Christ. Prophecy.
Daniel chapter 8, verse 14. And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed.
These things, Daniel said, would take place at the time of the end. Daniel described it as a time, a times, and half a time. Or, in the language of prophecy, 3.5 years. A time is a year, a times 2 years, and half a time half a year. Or 3.5 years. And what does that make? It makes 42 months, or 1260 days again. Daniel in chapter 8 is prophesying that 2300 years shall pass before the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Following this time, all things will be made pure again. Before this time, the people would have fallen into a state of abomination, without love for God or man, and they would be troublemakers, haters of their fellow men, all of the things we see in the world today. But after 2300 years, the sanctuary would be cleansed, and the hopes of men would be restored once again. Daniel links Christ and Baha'u'llah together in these remarkable prophecies. That's why the Bible scholars use these chapters not only to determine Christ's first coming, the time of his first coming, but also the time when Christ would return to the earth. Daniel said that from the issuing of the decree to rebuild Jerusalem until the cutting off of the Messiah or the crucifixion of Christ, there are appointed 490 days, or 490 years in prophecy. Both the cutting off of the Messiah, the death of Christ, and the end of the abomination of desolation begin with that same decree to rebuild Jerusalem. Scholars determine that this was the decree of the Emperor Artaxerxes issued in the year 457. And where was Artaxerxes from? From Persia, Where did Daniel have his vision? In Shushan, capital of Elam in ancient Persia. When did Daniel say all of this would take place? At the time of the end, a time which showed in his prophecies to be 1844, the year of the birth of the Baha'i faith. Now, just listen to this. This is a Christian Bible scholar speaking. E.P. Kakamai, in a new edition of H.G. Guinness's book, Light for the Last Days, a book about prophecy. He quotes Guinness as saying the following about Daniel's prophecy.
From the first day of the Jewish month of Nisan in the year 457,
that's the year of Artaxerxes' decree, 457 B.C.,
until the first day of the month of Nisan in the year 1844,
or the year of the birth of the Baha'i faith, 1844,
there are exactly 2,300 years that have passed.
So thus the third promise which Christ gave to his followers was also fulfilled by the year 1844. Three important promises of Christ himself announcing the day of his return to earth.
First promise, the gospel would be preached everywhere.
Fulfilled by 1844.
Second promise, the times of the Gentiles would be fulfilled.
Also in 1844.
Third promise, the words of Daniel about the cleansing of the sanctuary.
Also fulfilled in 1844, the year of the birth of the Baha'i faith. Christ has himself proved to you that Baha'u'llah is the true one. He said that his sheep would recognize his voice in that day. Christ has given you three clear-cut promises telling you exactly when he would return. Each one of them brings you to Baha'u'llah, to the Baha'i faith, and to the year 1844. In the words of Christ himself, whoso readeth, let him understand. Baha'u'llah's declaration to the world that he was the promised one was made in the valley of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, near to the site of the river Chebar, the place where the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel saw his vision of the glory of God. In that valley, Baha'u'llah wrote his book of certitude. This book, Baha'u'llah said, broke the seals of the book referred to by Daniel. This book disclosed the meaning of those words of Scripture, which were destined by Daniel to remain closed up until the time of the end. The time of the end had come. Christ said, and these are his words again,
whoso readeth, let him understand.
It would take a pure heart, someone searching for the truth to understand and accept. Let us now turn to the Gospel of John. Prophecy.
John, chapter 15, verse 26. But when the Comforter is come, whom I will send unto you from the Father, even the Spirit of truth, which proceedeth from the Father, he shall testify of me.
Baha'u'llah did just that. He wrote often of Christ, lovingly, tenderly, movingly. Baha'u'llah told the Christians that he, Baha'u'llah, was that Comforter. Listen to just a few words which Baha'u'llah has written about Christ. Remember, Baha'u'llah was exiled like Abraham. He was stoned like Moses. He was scourged like Christ. He was weighted down with 100-pound chains. He was driven from city to city and persecuted almost all the adult years of his life for nearly half a century. Baha'u'llah was 2 times stoned, 3 times imprisoned, and 4 times exiled. He suffered dreadful persecutions in 4 countries, in 2 continents. Imagine that. Baha'u'llah wrote, if ye have resolved to shed the blood of him whose coming Jesus Christ himself hath announced, behold me, standing ready and defenseless before you. Deal with me after your own desires. In another place, Baha'u'llah wrote, if ye be intent on crucifying once again Jesus, the Spirit of God, put me to death, for he hath once more in my person been made manifest unto you. Deal with me as ye wish, for I have vowed to lay down my life in the path of God. Prophecy.
John chapter 16, verses 7 and 13. Nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It is expedient for you that I go away. For if I go not away, the Comforter will not come unto you. But if I depart, I will send him unto you.
Baha'u'llah wrote to the leaders of Christianity and told them that he was that Comforter promised by Christ. Baha'u'llah offered them all of the proofs they required. Baha'u'llah wrote, O Pope in Rome, O concourse of patriarchs, O concourse of archbishops, O concourse of bishops, O concourse of priests, O people of the gospel, O people of Christianity. He wrote to them all. Baha'u'llah left no one out from the whole world of Christianity. To those religious leaders, Baha'u'llah said, Ye are the stars of the heaven of my knowledge. My mercy desireth not that ye should fall upon the earth. That's another prophecy too, isn't it? I mean about the stars falling in the last days. Baha'u'llah told them all that he was the Comforter, the Spirit of truth. He urged them to open their eyes and their hearts to the truth. Prophecy.
John, 16th chapter, verse 13. Howbeit when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you into all truth. For he shall not speak of himself, but whatsoever he shall hear, that shall he speak.
Baha'u'llah spoke with the voice of God, as Jesus had spoken of old. Baha'u'llah wrote over 100 volumes on all aspects of life. He gave answers to the critical problems facing humanity. Baha'u'llah did indeed guide men to all truth. And Baha'u'llah spoke as Christ said he would speak, as bidden by the Almighty. Baha'u'llah told us that this message was greater than himself, that it came from God. Baha'u'llah addressed the leaders of humanity and urged them to put into effect these teachings and the laws of God for the protection, the welfare, and the betterment of all mankind. Baha'u'llah rebuked the Christians for their neglect. He said, Heard ye not the words of Jesus concerning the Spirit of truth? Why then, when I came unto you, did you turn aside from me? Here is yet another prophecy. Christ is speaking to us. Listen.
John chapter 16, verse 14. He shall glorify me, for he shall receive of mine, and shall show it unto you.
Baha'u'llah did just that. He took the pure teachings of Christ, and he showed the world their wonderful meaning and their application for today. Baha'u'llah glorified the greatness of Christ. This is but one paragraph from the pen of Baha'u'llah about the beauty of His Holiness Jesus the Christ. I'm quoting Baha'u'llah's words now. We testify that when He, Jesus Christ, came into the world, He shed the splendor of His glory upon all created things. Through Him the leper recovered from the leprosy of perversity and ignorance. Through Him, Christ, the unchaste and the wayward were healed. Through His power, born of Almighty God, the eyes of the blind were opened and the soul of the sinner sanctified. He, Christ, it is who purified the world. Blessed is the man who, with a face beaming with light, hath turned towards Him. End of quotation. Baha'u'llah did indeed testify of Christ. He glorified Jesus in a way that no one had done before or since. Is it any wonder that Baha'u'llah should say to the Christians, Read ye the Evangel, the Gospel, and yet refuse to acknowledge the All-Glorious? Those are Baha'u'llah's words. Those who are spiritually blind in this day and prevent others from accepting the truth of Baha'u'llah's coming are like those blind leaders of the blind mentioned by Christ. Christ said, when the blind lead the blind, both fall into the ditch. Baha'u'llah is still calling out to the Christians. He says, and these are his words,
Verily he, Jesus, said, Come after me, and I will make you to become fishers of men. In this day, however, we say, Come ye after me, that we may make you to become quickeners of mankind.
Open the doors of your hearts, Baha'u'llah writes to the Christians of the world. For he who was the Spirit, Jesus, verily standeth before them. We in truth have opened unto you the gates of the kingdom. Will ye bar the doors of your houses in my face? When Baha'u'llah reached the Holy Land, a prisoner and an exile, he referred to Bethlehem, the birthplace of Christ. There was he, Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, the return of Christ, standing in the Holy Land, the place prophesied for him in the last days, on the mountain of God. He had fulfilled all of the prophecies. The glory of God had come from the east by way of the gate. Yet the people sought only his destruction, as they had sought that of Jesus before him. Baha'u'llah, as quoted in the book, The Promised Day Is Come, cried out,
O Bethlehem, this light hath risen in the Orient, the East, and travelled toward the Occident, the West, until it reached thee in the evening of its life. Tell me then, do the sons recognize the Father, Baha'u'llah, and acknowledge him, or do they deny him, even as the people aforetime denied him, Jesus, the Son?
What a beautiful, tender, sad, sweet story. It is tragic, but it is full of power and majesty. Baha'u'llah has gone on from victory to victory. Those who opposed him have gone from defeat to defeat. His faith has circled the entire planet. Listen, and you will see how the Old Testament prophet Micah foretells Baha'u'llah's coming so accurately.
Micah describes almost every step along the path which Baha'u'llah took when he was driven by the kings of Persia and Turkey from his homeland in Persia to Israel, the Holy Land. Micah also tells us exactly how many years Baha'u'llah would tell the people of the world about his message.
If you were to go to the automobile club and ask for a road map so you could drive from Los Angeles to Chicago, say, you would not receive clearer instructions than those which Micah gave to the world and to us, so that we might recognize Baha'u'llah when he came. Now, let's see exactly what the Bible says in that single remarkable chapter of Micah. This is the 7th chapter of Micah.
Chapter 7, verse 12 through 15. In that day also he shall come even to thee from Assyria, and from the fortified cities, and from the fortress even to the river, and from sea to sea, and from mountain to mountain. Notwithstanding, the land shall be desolate because of them that dwell therein, for the fruit of their doings. Feed thy people with thy rod, the flock of thine heritage, which dwells solitarily in the wood, in the midst of Carmel. According to the days of thy coming out of the land of Egypt, will I show unto him marvelous things.
And that's the end of the quotation, thank you. It's a little long that way, so now let's take that chapter and these verses in the light of Baha'u'llah's coming. Micah, in one single chapter, gives an astonishing answer to those who ridiculed him, Micah, in his day, for saying all of these things. They laughed at him, you know, at Micah, and they jeered at him, and they said, Where is the Lord thy God? And this is what Micah said to those who mocked him.
In that day, meaning the last days, in that day also he shall come even to thee from Assyria.
And that is exactly where Baha'u'llah came from. Baha'u'llah came from Persia. Part of the land now known as Persia was once in the geographic area of the ancient Assyrian kingdom. Micah tells us,
In that day also he shall come even to thee from the fortified cities.
Baha'u'llah did. He came in exactly that way. Baha'u'llah was exiled to the fortified city of Constantinople, and finally they sent him to the fortified city of Akka. This was a dreaded Turkish fortress of Akka. The kings thought surely that Baha'u'llah would die there, and would be heard of no more, and that it would be the end of his religion forever. But God had other plans. These pitiful kings did not even realize that they were fulfilling the prophecies from the Old Testament, the New Testament, from the Quran, the holy book of the Muslims, and from all the holy books. They drove Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, to Israel, the Holy Land. They hoped to end his faith. All they really did was fulfill prophecy after prophecy. The more they did to end the Baha'i faith, the more they fulfilled the prophecies. In that same chapter, Micah says,
In that day also he shall come even to thee from the fortress even to the river.
Baha'u'llah did just that too. Baha'u'llah was finally delivered by the hand of God. He was free from the mighty fortress prison of Akka, in which they had shut him up. When Baha'u'llah left the fortress prison of Akka, he went outside the city to a garden, now called the Garden of Rizwan. It was a garden that was surrounded by the waters of the ancient river Belus, a river now called in Israel Naman. So we see Baha'u'llah came from the fortress to the river, exactly as Micah foretold. And Micah didn't stop his prophecies there. Micah is still speaking of the promised one.
In that day he shall come even to thee from sea to sea.
Did Baha'u'llah do that? He certainly did. Baha'u'llah was driven from sea to sea on his way to Israel. Baha'u'llah sailed on the Black Sea along the northern coast of Turkey on his exile to Constantinople. He crossed the Mediterranean Sea on his last exile to the Holy Land. Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, came to the very land to which the prophecies of old said the glory of God would come from the east. And there was Baha'u'llah at last in the Holy Land. He was driven there by his enemies, who, without knowing it, helped him, Baha'u'llah, to fulfill all these marvelous prophecies. The prophecies of Micah are still not finished, though. There's still more. Micah says,
In that day also he shall come even to thee from mountain to mountain.
Ask yourself, did Baha'u'llah do that too? Exactly that. Just as His Holiness Christ withdrew into the desert before his mission began, so Baha'u'llah too withdrew. He went into the mountains of Kurdistan near Sulaymaniyah in Iraq. On Mount Sargalu in Iraq, Baha'u'llah revealed wonderful words and wonderful teachings.
Baha'u'llah came in exile from Mount Sargalu in Iraq to Mount Carmel in the Holy Land, from mountain to mountain, exactly as Micah had prophesied.
Baha'u'llah stood on the side of Mount Carmel, and he announced that the promises had been fulfilled. The promised one so long hidden from the mortal eyes of the world had now appeared, he said. In the very next verse, still from that same chapter, Micah tells us another wonderful thing. He prophesies exactly how long God will have his messenger, his promised one, feed his flock in those last days. It's true. These are Micah's words. Micah says that God will show unto him, meaning the Redeemer, marvelous things. And how long will God do that? Micah tells us it will be for 40 years. Listen.
Feed thy people with thy rod, the flock of thine heritage, which dwells solitarily in the wood in the midst of Carmel, as in the days of old. According to the days of thy coming out of the land of Egypt, will I show unto him marvelous things.
For 40 years, Micah says. This is the length of the time the Jews spent coming out of the land of Egypt. 40 years. Baha'u'llah's mission on earth lasted exactly that length of time. 40 years. In the same chapter 14 of the book of Numbers, which tells how the Jews will wander in the wilderness for 40 years, it is also written that,
As truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord.
Imagine that. In that day the earth would be filled with the glory of the Lord. And that is what Baha'u'llah's name means. It was to him, Baha'u'llah, the glory of the Lord, that Micah said God would show wonderful things for 40 years. And he did. Baha'u'llah wrote over 100 volumes dealing with all the needs of mankind in a ministry lasting 40 years. During the 40 years of his mission, Baha'u'llah wrote over 100 volumes. He addressed letters and messages to the kings and rulers of the world, to the leaders of mankind, to the heads of great religions, to the peoples of these religions, and to the peoples of the world, to scholars, philosophers, students, to leaders in the intellectual, political, literary, mystical, commercial, humanitarian spheres of human activity. No one was left out. No one. Was that feeding his flock or not? For 40 years, God showed to Baha'u'llah wonderful things. Baha'u'llah shared these wonderful things, these teachings, with all mankind. There's still more, and it's still the same Micah talking. Micah prophesies of Baha'u'llah's coming in still another chapter. Micah promises in chapter 4, verse 1, that in the last days the house of the Lord will be established in the mountain. He says,
In the last days the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and people shall flow unto it.
Baha'u'llah's world center is established there on the side of the mountain of God. The supreme body which now directs the affairs of Baha'u'llah's faith is known by that name, house. It is called the universal house of justice. Another prophet, Habakkuk, said, prophecy,
Chapter 2, verse 14. For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea.
His teachings are already covering the earth as the waters cover the sea. Many nations will flow unto this house of the Lord, said Micah, and the law shall go forth from that mountain. The nations will come and say, let us go up to the house of the Lord, and then God will teach us his ways.
Of course, we should understand. The house of the Lord was established as soon as Baha'u'llah appeared on that mountain. That is the fulfillment of the prophecy.
But that was only the beginning of the fulfillment. How much greater the fulfillment becomes when we see that Baha'u'llah himself, on the side of that mountain, called for a supreme, democratically elected administrative body to rule the affairs of the world. Baha'u'llah gave to the body its title, the Universal House of Justice. The prophet Isaiah also spoke about this house of the Lord on the mountain of God in the Holy Land. Like Baha'u'llah, Isaiah associated that house with the word justice. This is the same Isaiah who said that Mount Carmel would see the glory of the Lord. That's Baha'u'llah's name, isn't it? Let's hear a little more about justice and peace and about this great Messiah from chapter 9, verse 7 in the book of Isaiah.
Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end, upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice.
Note the words, with justice.
And with justice from henceforth even forever.
Baha'u'llah reminded the people of this very prophecy of Isaiah. Baha'u'llah said to them, I'm quoting now, the most great law is come, and the ancient beauty ruleth upon the throne of David. Thus hath my pen spoken that which the histories of bygone ages have revealed. End of quotation. Let us clearly understand that this prophecy about the house of the Lord means much more than just the fulfillment of the prophecy of Baha'u'llah's coming. It plainly means that this house of the Lord would be a house in which the followers of the promised one would come and would work for the good of mankind in those last days. The remnant of God. The Old Testament prophet Haggai, speaking of the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, chapter 1, points out that there would be troublemakers who would say, I'm quoting his words now, this people say the time is not come, the time that the Lord's house should be built. End of quotation. When that happens, the Lord of hosts warns such people, saying, consider your ways. How well that applies to those who say the same thing about the time not being right now for the return of Christ or the building of the house. These words are from verses 13 and 14.
Then spake Haggai, the Lord's messenger, in the Lord's message unto the people, saying, I am with you, saith the Lord. And the spirit of all the remnant of the people came and did work in the house of the Lord of hosts.
Yes, Baha'u'llah raised up the house of the Lord and called it a house of justice. Baha'u'llah himself said that he was the one about whom Isaiah was speaking. Let us use this one prophecy of Isaiah about the Prince of Peace to show you how true these words are. This famous reference to the Prince of Peace comes from Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. Prophecy.
For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace.
That prophecy is often read in Christian churches on Christmas Day. The prophecy is taken to be a reference to Christ, even though most of the things in the prophecy do not apply to His Holiness Christ. Now let's look at the prophecy once again. Now that the books have been unsealed, let us examine it phrase by phrase and see exactly to whom it does refer. Prophecy.
The government shall be upon his shoulder.
Christ made it clear that this certainly did not apply to him. Christ said, Render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Christ also said, My kingdom is not of this world. But with Baha'u'llah, The government is upon his shoulder. Baha'u'llah undertook the entire reorganization of human society. He provided the institutions necessary to maintain it, as well as the authority and the guidance for its future. In his Lord's Prayer, Christ made it clear that the kingdom of God would appear on earth in the last days.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven.
The beginning of this kingdom of God on earth has already taken place. The Baha'i faith, guided by the teachings of Baha'u'llah, has already begun to establish this Christ-promised kingdom of God on earth in every continent. Baha'u'llah himself wrote, "Followers of the gospel, the Father hath come. That which ye were promised in the kingdom of God is fulfilled." What about the next phrase in this prophecy of Isaiah, Marguerite?
And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God.
Almost all of these phrases Christ himself specifically repudiated. It's as though Christ wanted to make certain that such mistaken references to himself would not mislead people in the day of his return. Christ disclaimed being the mighty God when he called himself the Son of God. Christ was not the counselor. His message was a beautiful one of love to the individual, to draw mankind back to God. Baha'u'llah, on the other hand, was the counselor. His message was one of justice for society. It was for all mankind. Baha'u'llah himself wrote of his counsels to the rulers of men. He even called them that, counsels. What about the next phrase of Isaiah's prophecy?
The Everlasting Father.
Well, if there's anything clear, it is this, that Christ did not consider himself the Father. Jesus continually differentiated between himself and the Father. In many such references, such as, "Him that sent me," "My Father is greater than I go unto the Father," "I will pray the Father, I do nothing of myself, but as my Father hath taught me." Jesus made it abundantly clear that no prophecy about the Father could refer to him. Christ even stated that the Father had knowledge which was not possessed by the Son, saying,
"But of that day and that hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father."
Although it is plain that in most of these references, Christ is speaking of God when he speaks of the Father, even so, Jesus made it equally plain that just as he, Christ, had come in the station of the Son, the time would come in the last days when he, Christ, would return in the station of the Father. He told us this in the 8th chapter of Mark, verse 38.
"When he, the Son of Man, cometh in the glory of his Father."
Matthew, in the 25th chapter of his book, says plainly that this will be the day when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and before him shall be gathered all nations. "Watch, therefore," Christ warned his followers, "for ye know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh." And so that you will without doubt know that Baha'u'llah did tell the world of Christianity that he was the Father, the one foretold by Christ, let me share with you a few more of his words. These words were written to one of the supreme heads of Christianity, Pope Pius IX of Rome. These are the words of Baha'u'llah. "The word which the Son Jesus concealed is made manifest. It hath been sent down in the form of a human temple in this day. Blessed be the Lord, who is the Father. He verily is come unto the nations in his most great majesty. This is the day whereon the rock, Peter, crieth out and shouteth, saying, Lo, the Father is come, and that which ye were promised in the kingdom is fulfilled." All right. Now, Marguerite, what about that last phrase in the prophecy of Isaiah? What did Isaiah say?
He said, "And his name shall be called the Prince of Peace."
All right, now we're down to it. The Prince of Peace, not Christ, surely. Jesus in Matthew 10:34 said plainly, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword." Christ also said, Luke 12:51, "Suppose ye that I am come to give peace on earth? I tell you nay, but rather division." Baha'u'llah, on the other hand, did come to bring peace on earth. Baha'u'llah gave us the laws, the principles, the agencies, the institutions, and the teachings in his many volumes of his writings by which world peace could be established and permanently secured for all men. To a famous Christian scholar and Orientalist, E.G. Brown of Cambridge University, who met Baha'u'llah in Israel, when he, Baha'u'llah, was there as a prisoner, Baha'u'llah said plainly,
"These ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come."
Let me share with you a few more words of Baha'u'llah on this subject, so there can be no doubt about his call to the rulers of the world for peace. Baha'u'llah says, "O rulers of the earth, be reconciled among yourselves, that ye may need no more armaments, save in a measure to safeguard your territories and dominions. Beware lest ye disregard the counsels of the all-knowing, the faithful." End of quotation. And yet again, quote, "My object," this is Baha'u'llah speaking, "my object is none other than the betterment of the world and the tranquility of its peoples. The well-being of mankind, its peace and security, are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. This unity can never be achieved so long as the counsels which the pen of the Most High hath revealed are suffered to pass unheeded." End of quotation. And so we see peace, disarmament, and once again the counsels of the counselor in the words of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah speaks again of world peace, words written some 100 years ago, mind you. These are his words.
"The time must come when the imperative necessity for the holding of a vast and all-embracing assemblage of men will be universally realized. The rulers and kings of the earth must needs attend it, and, participating in its deliberations, must consider such ways and means as will lay the foundation of the world's great peace among men. Such a peace demandeth that the great powers should resolve, for the sake of the tranquility of the peoples of the earth, to be fully reconciled among themselves." End of quotation.
And then Baha'u'llah goes on to call for arbitration, for disarmament. Baha'u'llah warns the kings of their downfall if they fail to heed his counsels. In that same book, Baha'u'llah also addressed the democratic bodies of the world, calling upon them to build that same peace and unity. He said,
"O ye elected representatives of the people in every land, take ye counsel together, and let your concern be only for that which profiteth mankind, and bettereth the condition thereof.
Isn't that wonderful?
That which the Lord hath ordained as sovereign remedy and mightiest instrument for the healings of all the world is the union of all its peoples in one universal cause, one common faith."
End of quotation. Baha'u'llah called mankind to the day of the one fold and the one shepherd, promised in the sacred scriptures. He gave to the leaders of men all the guidance, the laws, the agencies, the institutions they needed to establish and preserve peace on earth. So Baha'u'llah was indeed the Prince of Peace. All right, let's talk about some of the questions that people ask. Perhaps they say, Baha'u'llah's name is strange. Baha'u'llah, what does it mean? And what about false prophets? Well, the Baha'is have wonderful answers from the sacred scriptures for all of these questions. And this is one of the most welcome questions to Baha'is. Christ did say clearly, beware of false prophets. Christ also said, take heed that no man deceive you. Those last words are in the very same chapter in which Christ speaks of his coming, about his return, and tells his disciples exactly how they can recognize the time of his coming. The reason Christ gives his followers such clear evidence of when he will return in this chapter about false prophets is so they won't make a mistake. Christ tells the Christians exactly how they can determine whether a prophet is false or not. Christ gives his followers a simple, clear formula, one which they can use to determine if a prophet is true or false. What was that formula? Prophecy.
Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 through 19. Beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns, or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Wherefore, by their fruits ye shall know them.
By their fruits ye shall know them. Well, nothing could be plainer than that, right? You shall know the prophet by his fruits. If he brings forth bad fruit, he's a false prophet. If he brings forth good fruit, he's true. Christ said that. So let us see how Baha'u'llah measures up to this formula of Jesus. Baha'u'llah's teachings bring a healing message to all men. Among these fruits are the love of God, the love of man, the elimination of all forms of prejudice, the independent investigation of truth, the pursuit of peace, the harmonizing of capital and labor, education for all children and peoples, the elimination of extremes of wealth and poverty, the harmony of religion and science, the equality of opportunity for both women and men, and these are but a few of the wonderful things which Baha'u'llah has taught. Baha'u'llah not only taught these principles, he showed mankind how they could be established. Baha'u'llah wrote over 100 volumes upon all aspects of life. These books are filled with spiritual fruits to nourish mankind. It was a famous Christian clergyman, Dr. T.K. Cheney of Oxford University in England, who said,
"If there is any prophet in recent times, it is to Baha'u'llah that we must go." Baha'u'llah was a man of the highest class, that of prophets.
Why? Because of the fruits which Baha'u'llah brought to the world. This is yet another of the promises of Christ fulfilled by the coming of Baha'u'llah. The Christians of the world can hasten to embrace the faith of Baha'u'llah, confident that he is a true prophet. It was not a Baha'i, but a Christian educator and scholar, Dr. George Washington Carver of Tuskegee Institute, who said of the faith of Baha'u'llah,
"I am so happy to know that the Christ-like,"
note those words, the Christ-like
gospel of goodwill is growing throughout the world. You hold in your organization, the Baha'i faith, the key that will settle all of our difficulties, real and imaginary. May God bless, keep, and prosper you."
Why did this great educator say that? Because of the fruits that Baha'u'llah brought into the world, that's why. A famous historian, Dr. Herbert Adams Gibbons, also a Christian and not a Baha'i, called Baha'u'llah's teachings a regenerating force in the world. Dr. Gibbons said,
Taken together, the
teachings of Baha'u'llah,
taken together, they form an unanswerable argument and plea for the only way that the world can be made over.
Why? Because of the fruits which Baha'u'llah brought into the world. The love, the kindness, the generosity, the understanding, but above all, the social justice. Baha'u'llah has written,
"The best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom, if thou desirest me."
Let me give you a few more excerpts of Baha'u'llah's words. You judge for yourself what kind of fruits Baha'u'llah has brought into the world. For example, Baha'u'llah wrote, "The essence of faith is fewness of words and abundance of deeds. Beware lest ye walk in the ways of them whose words differ from their deeds. Men must show forth fruits. A fruitless man in the words of His Holiness the Spirit, Jesus the Christ, is like a fruitless tree and is fit for the fire." End of quotation. Judge Baha'u'llah by those words, and by these.
"Let your acts be a guide to all mankind. It is through your deeds that ye can distinguish yourselves from others. Through them, the brightness of your light can be shed upon the whole earth."
The writings of Baha'u'llah's faith, his teachings, his fruits, can be seen also in these words. Abdul-Baha, Baha'u'llah's son, explained these fruits, saying,
"Do not be content with showing friendship in words alone. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who cross your path."
This is another fruit by which to judge Baha'u'llah.
Show the utmost kindness and compassion to the sick and suffering. This has greater effect than the remedy itself. You must always have his love and affection when you visit the ailing and afflicted.
And just these last few fruits. Baha'u'llah instructed that the people who love God must be busied with whatever may be conducive to the betterment of the world and the education of its peoples. And in another place, Baha'u'llah writes this: they who are the people of God have no ambition except to revive the world, to ennoble its life and regenerate the people. Truthfulness and goodwill have at all times marked their relations with all men. Their outward conduct is but a reflection of their inward life, and this inward life a mirror of their outward conduct. Quotation ends. Now you can see why the Baha'is are so delighted when Christians ask them about false prophets, because Christ himself told his followers, the Christians, how they could judge Baha'u'llah by his fruits. You have heard the opinions of illustrious Christian scholars, not Baha'is. You have seen how they have judged Baha'u'llah and praised him. You can judge for yourself by his teachings. You don't have to accept anyone else's opinion.
You will know that Baha'u'llah is a true and not a false prophet when you judge him by the standard of Christ himself. Baha'u'llah said we must have independent investigation of truth. Look into everything with a searching eye, he said.
You will see that Baha'u'llah has indeed met every test set by Christ himself for the day of his return. There is another thing that people often say when first they hear about Baha'u'llah. They say, Baha'u'llah is a new name to me. I don't feel at home with it yet. Well, that's not a bad thing. That is a good thing. Be delighted that Baha'u'llah's name is a new one to you. If it were not a new name, Baha'u'llah could not be the promised one. He could not be the return of Christ. So instead of this new name being a handicap, it's one of the best and most wonderful things of all. That's in the Bible. Perhaps the greatest of the prophets of Israel, Isaiah, spoke of the day when the religion of God would be spread around the world, the day which would see the glory of the Lord. When that day came, Isaiah said, his people, the people of God, would be called by a new name. Prophecy.
Isaiah chapter 62, verse 2. And the Gentiles shall see thy righteousness, and all the kings thy glory. And thou shalt be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord shall name.
That is exactly what has happened. The justice and righteousness of Baha'u'llah has become known among the Gentiles, among all the peoples of the world. You have already heard some of the praise which Christian scholars and writers have given to Baha'u'llah. In yet another place, Isaiah makes that same promise about the new name. It is in chapter 65. Isaiah, also in chapter 65, mentions the new name. Prophecy.
For the Lord God shall call his servants by another name.
In the 56th chapter, Isaiah again mentions this new name. In that same chapter, Isaiah also mentions God's holy mountain, and says that there will be a house of prayer for all the peoples of the world built there. Listen to what Isaiah says in these excerpts from that same chapter 56, verses 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Even unto them will I give a name better than the sons and of daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. Even them will I bring to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. For mine house shall be called an house of prayer for all people.
It is clear that this new name refers to Baha'u'llah and the Baha'is in the last days, and not to Christ and Christianity, because Christian scripture also prophesies of this same coming day. A promise of a new name that will be given to the followers of Christ on the day of his return is found in the book of Revelation. Prophecy.
Revelation chapter 3, verse 12. Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out. And I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem, which cometh down out of heaven from my God, and I will write upon him my new name.
These prophecies make it clear that it will take a pure and sincere heart to understand the meaning of these words. For the very next verse says,
He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches.
He that hath an ear, he that hath a spiritual ear. Yet the churches have been silent for over a century. No word from them about the return of Christ, the coming of Baha'u'llah. Meanwhile, the world has gone from bad to worse, exactly as foreseen by Christ and Isaiah and the prophets of the past. Its condition will become worse still, until it will be, in the words of prophecy, such a time of trouble as was never seen before. Only those riding in the ship of God on that stormy sea will be safe in that day, the safe ship of Baha'u'llah's faith. Baha'u'llah's words make it very clear that he is the one who is meant in this prophecy about the new name. Baha'u'llah declared that the city of God had descended from heaven, and that Mount Carmel had been made the seat of his throne. Baha'u'llah writes,
Call out, O Zion, O Carmel, and announce the joyful tidings. He that was hidden from mortal eyes is come. Hasten forth, and circumambulate the city of God that hath descended from heaven.
The same wonderful story about the city of God descending from heaven in the last day is repeated in the final 2 chapters of the book of Revelation. Prophecy.
Chapter 21, verse 2. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven.
And again,
verse 5. And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new.
And in that same chapter, verse 23.
And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon, to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it.
Baha'u'llah's name means the glory of God. We know that. And Baha'u'llah stood there on that holy mountain and proclaimed that the city of God had once again descended upon the earth. That last book of Christian Scripture speaks constantly about the return of Christ. In the final chapter are these words.
Chapter 22, verse 7. Behold, I come quickly. Blessed is he that keepeth the sayings of the prophecy of this book.
And there shall be no more mysteries, for the books were opened.
Verse 10. And he saith unto me, Seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand.
And these words from the book of Revelation.
Blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have a right to the tree of life, and may enter through the gates into the city.
Baha'u'llah has thrown wide the gates. Baha'u'llah stood on Mount Carmel, and the prophecies were fulfilled. It is in this chapter of Revelation, chapter 3, that time and again the warning is given to the churches of Christ, and through them to all of his followers for all time, to be alert and to watch, and to look for his coming, and to watch for the day of his return. Revelation says,
If therefore thou shalt not watch, I will come on thee as a thief, and thou shalt not know what hour I will come upon thee.
Baha'u'llah announced his mission to the world well over 100 years ago. The Christian world was not watching. The book of Revelation also said in that same chapter, He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. 3 times that powerful phrase is repeated in a single chapter. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. There is no excuse for the followers of Christ not to have recognized Baha'u'llah in the day of his Christ's return. Revelation chapter 3, verse 20 and 22. Prophecy.
Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice, and open the door, I will come in to him. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches.
Baha'u'llah has been knocking on the door for over 120-some years, and still the door has not been opened by the great masses of Christians. The prophecy says,
I know thy works, that thou hast a name that thou livest, and art dead.
The Spirit is gone, which is only natural, for Christ has returned. The Christians, who should be the first to accept him, to recognize him, are among the last to accept him. in spite of all that both Christ and Baha'u'llah have done to open their eyes. Baha'u'llah himself wrote to the leaders of the Christian church so that they might be among the first of those who would have an ear to hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. Baha'u'llah wrote,
This is that which the Son, Jesus, hath decreed, and whatsoever hath proceeded out of his, Christ's, blameless, his truth-speaking, trustworthy mouth, can never be altered.
End of quotation. What a tender feeling Baha'u'llah had for Christ. It is understandable, for after all, they are one in spirit. It is like seeing one sun up in the heavens and holding up two mirrors to that sun. We see the light of Christ in one mirror and the light of Baha'u'llah in the other mirror. There is no difference between them, and that is what the return means. The same sunlight of God's truth shines in both the mirror of Christ and the mirror of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah wrote to all the people of Christianity,
O concourse of Christians, were ye to be shut out as by a veil from him, this would be for no other reason than your own waywardness and ignorance. Ye make mention of me, and know me not.
In another place, Baha'u'llah wrote to the Christians, saying, O people of the gospel, they who were not in the kingdom, people who were not Christians, have now entered it, the kingdom. Whilst we behold you, the Christians, in this day, tarrying at the gate. We behold you, O children of the kingdom, in darkness. This verily beseemeth you not. O followers of the Spirit Jesus, walk not in the footsteps of every divine, religious leader that hath gone far astray. Open the doors of your hearts. He who is the Spirit Jesus verily standeth before them. End of quotation. The sun that shines in the mirror of Baha'u'llah is the same sun that shines in the mirror of Christ. That is what the return of Christ means. It is that simple. In the 2nd chapter of Revelation, we have yet another prophecy about a new name for the last day. Prophecy.
Revelation chapter 2, verse 17. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna, and will give him a white stone, and in the white stone a new name written, which no man knoweth, saving he that receiveth it.
And how does that verse begin, Marguerite?
He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches.
Right. Because of time, of course, we've been able to touch upon only a few of the prophecies fulfilled by Baha'u'llah.
We have spoken during this study class about the books being sealed until the coming of the Baha'i faith and Baha'u'llah. At that time, the books were opened. This is why today there is nowhere else to turn to for guidance and advice except to Baha'u'llah.
That is what the Scriptures told us. The books are sealed to those leaders of religion who have failed to recognize Baha'u'llah. This is not only true of the people of the Christian faith, it is true of the people of all religions. Baha'u'llah is the promised one of all peoples and all religions, not just Christianity.
The promised one of all religions has come. That is not just an idea of the Baha'is. The Bible itself made you that exact promise. It promised that the Messiah would do just that.
If this week has taught us any one other thing, it is this. No Christian who was really on the watch, as Christ instructed him to be, would have failed to examine the story of the coming of Baha'u'llah when he heard about it. The Christian clergyman R.A. Torrey, when he was the Dean of the Bible Institute of Los Angeles, in his book, The Return of the Lord Jesus, listed over 250 separate distinct passages on the certainty and consequences of the second coming of Christ. Still the Christian world is waiting because they didn't know the hour. But now they do. These words should never be taken to be an attack on the religions of other people. Never. Or upon the clergymen of the world. Never. Baha'u'llah himself forbids such a thing. Baha'u'llah praises the lofty station of those religious leaders whose behavior and deeds are as holy and noble as their words.
Such religious leaders, of whatever faith they may be, Baha'u'llah tells us, are like an eye to mankind, to guide it aright.
But we should not be misled by those who would close the door in the face of our search for truth. No one can be responsible for another man's soul. We can't expect that our Christian leaders are going to lead their followers into the path. Perhaps they feel too much is at stake for them. It was the same in the day of Christ's first coming. It's not something new. Jesus himself told his followers that. Prophecy.
Matthew chapter 5, verse 20. For I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven.
Christ warned people against those leaders who claimed that the spiritual law was in their hands. Yet they themselves turned aside from the messenger of God when he came, the very one whose coming they were instructed to be awake and to watch for. In Luke chapter 11, verse 52, Jesus said, Prophecy.
Woe unto you, lawyers, for ye have taken away the key of knowledge. Ye have entered not in yourselves, and them that were entering in ye hindered.
So we see that in this day we must act according to our own feelings and our own inner beliefs. No man, no spiritual leader can tell us what our own heart tells us. Yet, beloved friends, you may be sure that there will be many wonderful, heroic clergymen in these days who will accept Baha'u'llah, just as there were in the early days of Christianity, who will hear Baha'u'llah's message and accept it. Many already have. Over 400 of the leading clergymen accepted this faith in the land of its birth in its first years. Many religious leaders among the Christians today will hear the sound of Baha'u'llah's voice. Christ said, My sheep will know my voice. Christ said that the Spirit of truth would lead men to all truth. That Spirit of truth has come. The one who has the answers to all their problems has appeared. It is Baha'u'llah. Prophecy.
Isaiah chapter 29, verse 14. Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid.
Isn't it true? In his book, The Heritage of the Anglo-Saxon Race, M.H. Goyer, a millennial Christian scholar, declared, I'm quoting him now, the skepticism and unbelief so prevalent concerning the second advent of Christ is in itself a sign of the last days. St. Peter tells us, there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, Where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. That's in 2 Peter 3:4. One hears these very words everywhere today. Even among the leaders of the church, this terribly momentous event, return of Christ, is regarded with incredibility as visionary. End of quotation. Isaiah tells us in chapter 30 of his book that in this day the teachers of God will no longer be withdrawn from society. In the day of the Holy One, everyone will see these teachers, Isaiah says. They will proclaim his words, saying, This is the way, walk ye in it. The book of Psalms echoes this movement of the teachers too. This is also a prophecy. This is chapter 68, verse 11.
The Lord gave the word. Great was the company of those that published it.
This same chapter of the book of Psalms declares that all this would take place in the day when he, the promised one, would scatter the kings, exactly as Baha'u'llah has done. Isaiah, in chapter 30 of his book, also describes the new song that will be sung in the mountain of the Lord. His glorious voice, Isaiah says, will be heard everywhere. His teachers shall have a song of holiness, Isaiah tells us. I'm quoting now. As when one goeth with a pipe to come into the mountain of the Lord. After Baha'u'llah reached the Holy Land and walked on the side of Mount Carmel, he spoke of the song which God had stirred within his being. These are the words of Baha'u'llah.
Thou beholdest, O my God, how every bone in my body soundeth like a pipe with the music of thine inspiration.
End of quotation. And let's hear still another prophecy.
Isaiah chapter 35, verse 1. The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose.
The plain of Akka where Baha'u'llah walked, and the rocky slopes of the wildernesses of Mount Carmel where he pitched his tent, have now been transformed into beautiful gardens with different colored flowers, including many varieties of roses. Indeed, the wilderness and the desert have blossomed, as Isaiah promised. In the same chapter in which Isaiah said the glory of the Lord would appear and the nations would flow unto him, Isaiah also makes two other prophecies, both of which have been fulfilled by Baha'u'llah, the glory of the Lord. For example, prophecy.
Isaiah chapter 60, verse 13. The glory of Lebanon shall come unto thee, the fir tree, the pine tree, and the box together, to beautify the place of my sanctuary.
When you visit the Holy Land and go to the shrine of Baha'u'llah, you will see in the midst of that once arid spot green lawns, flowering vines and trees, and blossoms of every hue and description. The tomb and sanctuary of Baha'u'llah has been beautified. It is a magnificent jewel in that lovely setting nestled amidst the cypress and evergreen trees. Baha'u'llah's sanctuary has indeed been beautified. Same chapter of Isaiah, same verse, prophecy.
And I will make the place of my feet glorious.
Wherever you go in the Holy Land where the feet of Baha'u'llah have walked, you will see lovely gardens of matchless beauty. Those attractive red stone paths and white stone paths lead the way to imposing structures of stately beauty and grace. Roses of every hue, jacaranda trees, flame-colored flamboyant trees, flowering bougainvillea of many shades, crimson geraniums are seen on all sides. You will see some of the most beautiful gardens to be found in all of the world. And these are all places where the feet of Baha'u'llah, the glory of the Lord, have walked on the mountain of God and in the plain of Akka. The place of Baha'u'llah's feet has indeed been glorified. And here is yet another intriguing prophecy. This one is from Ezekiel. It is from the very same chapter in which Ezekiel prophesied that the glory of the Lord would come to his house in Israel by way of the gate from the east. And when he came, Ezekiel said, in his words, the glory of the Lord filled the house. Then, says Ezekiel, prophecy.
Chapter 43, verse 7. I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever.
The shrine of Baha'u'llah stands there on the historic plain of Akka. It is the area which Hosea said would be a door of hope for mankind. All the world knows where Baha'u'llah is entombed. No one knows for certain where His Holiness Moses is buried, nor can they be certain which of the places claimed by his various followers is the exact site of the tomb of His Holiness Christ. But the beautified sanctuary of Baha'u'llah and the glorified paths of his feet are known to all. Prophecy.
Isaiah chapter 35, from verses 2 and 4. Carmel and Sharon, they shall see the glory of the Lord. Behold, your God will come. He will come and save you.
Baha'u'llah, whose name means the glory of the Lord, came to Mount Carmel, which looks down upon the plain of Sharon. In that same chapter, Isaiah says that the eyes of the blind shall be open and see the truth. The ears of the deaf shall be unstopped, and they shall hear the truth. The parched ground will become green and verdant. The ransomed people of the Lord shall return from all parts of the world to that spot, rejoicing. And who is Isaiah speaking of? He is speaking about Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah fulfilled all of these wonderful prophecies. Baha'u'llah came to Mount Carmel, that mountain of God. Baha'u'llah has written saying, and we are quoting him now,
O peoples of the earth, this is the one whom the heart of the world remembereth, and is promised in the books of God. I am the one whom the tongue of Isaiah hath extolled, the one with whose name both the Torah and the Evangel, the Gospels, were adorned.
Baha'u'llah was a descendant of Abraham, the father of the faithful. Baha'u'llah was descended from Abraham through his third wife, Keturah. In the book of Genesis, God promises Abraham that one of his seed will inherit the land of Canaan in the last days. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 7, it declares,
And the Lord appeared unto Abram, and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land.
The house where Baha'u'llah lived in Israel in his last days was once in the ancient land of Canaan. Yes. From the terraces of that building, you can look north toward the tip of Lebanon. the land where the ladder of Tyre is found, and the place which Abraham described as the spot chosen by God. In a letter written on the eve of his banishment from Turkey to that spot in ancient Canaan, Baha'u'llah declared,
"Had Abraham attained it in this day, he too, falling prostrate upon the ground, would have cried, 'Mine heart is filled with peace, O thou Lord of all that is in heaven and on earth. I testify that thou hast unveiled before mine eyes all the glory of thy power and the full majesty of thy law.'" Let us share with you these two quotations. One is from Baha'u'llah and the other is from Isaiah. From Baha'u'llah, the Redeemer of men, we hear first,
O kings of Christendom, heard ye not the saying of Jesus the Spirit of God, I go away and come again unto you? Wherefore then did ye fail, when he did come again unto you in the clouds of heaven, to draw nigh unto him, that he might behold his face, and be of them that attained his presence? In another passage, he, Christ, saith, When he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you into all truth. And yet, behold, when he did bring the truth, ye refused to turn your faces towards him, and persisted in disporting yourselves with your pastimes and fancies. Ye welcomed him not, neither did ye seek his presence, that ye might hear the verses of God from his own mouth, and partake of the manifold wisdom of the Almighty. Ye have by reason of your failure hindered the breath of God from being wafted over you, and have withheld from your soul the sweetness of its fragrance. End of quotation. For each person hearing the story of the coming of Baha'u'llah, this is the day of judgment. And as Isaiah said, there is no place to flee to except him.
"Hear ye deaf, and look ye blind, that ye may see."
Isaiah said that also. These too are the words of Isaiah, taken from chapter 43, verses 8 through 11. Isaiah declared,
"Bring forth the blind people that have eyes, and the deaf that have ears. Let all the nations be gathered together, and let the people be assembled. Who among them can declare this, and show us former things? Let them bring forth their witnesses, that they may be justified. Or let them hear and say, It is the truth. Ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord, that I am he, even I am the Lord, and beside me there is no Savior."
Let them bring forth their witnesses, that they may be justified, or let them hear and say, It is the truth. And I am the Lord, and besides me there is no Savior. That's the story of Baha'u'llah.